The sun sank low behind the rolling plains, painting the sky in colors of burning amber and fading lavender, but for cowboy James Callahan, the beauty of that sunset brought no comfort. His world had grown darker with every passing day as he watched helplessly while his beloved wife, Mary, withered away in their small wooden home. Fever had taken hold of her, and despite his desperate rides to town for medicine and prayers whispered under his breath each night, nothing seemed strong enough to fight the sickness that consumed her. Mary had been the heart of his ranch, the one who turned empty walls into a home, who filled silence with laughter, and whose gentle hand smoothed away the rough edges of his cowboy life. He held her trembling hand as the fever worsened, promising her that he would never let their love be forgotten. But promises couldn't stop the fire burning within her fragile body, and one cold dawn, before the roosters crowed, Mary's breathing slowed, her chest stilled, and James's world shattered. The days that followed passed in a haze of sorrow. James buried her on the hill overlooking the wide open fields she loved so dearly. He hammered together a simple wooden cross, and his calloused hands shook as he carved her name into it with a knife. Every night, he would sit by the grave, his cowboy hat clutched against his chest, whispering stories to the stars about the woman he lost. The ranch grew silent without her presence, the sound of her humming gone from the kitchen, her laughter absent from the porch. Even the horses seemed to sense the emptiness, their restless eyes reflecting his grief. The ranch became a place of ghosts, and James, once known as a strong man of the land, now felt like a hollow shell carrying unbearable sorrow. Weeks passed, and James withdrew further into himself, speaking little, working mechanically, surviving rather than living. Neighbors visited with pies and kind words, but sympathy could not heal him. It was then that a letter arrived, its handwriting familiar, gentle curves of ink that reminded him of Mary. The letter was from Sarah, Mary's younger sister, who lived miles away. She had heard of Mary's passing and wrote that she would come to help James with the ranch, not wanting him to face such loneliness alone. James was torn. He wanted no one to replace Mary's presence, no one to fill her shoes, yet a part of him longed for company, for someone who understood his pain. With heavy hesitation, he agreed. When Sarah arrived, riding in a wagon with the wind tossing her chestnut hair around her face, James saw Mary in her at once, but with subtle differences. Sarah carried the same warm eyes but with a determination Mary never had to carry. She stepped down, her skirts dusted with the trail's journey, and before saying a word, she embraced James. That single touch shattered the icy walls he had built around himself. She wept against his chest, and though he hadn't cried since the day Mary was buried, tears finally broke through his silence. For the first time since the fever stole his wife, he felt like he wasn't alone in his grief. Sarah quickly became a source of quiet strength around the ranch. She cooked meals when James forgot to eat, tended the animals with capable hands, and filled the silence with her gentle presence. At first, James avoided looking at her too long, for every glimpse brought memories of Mary rushing back. But slowly, he began to notice things that belonged only to Sarah, the way her laughter carried a spark of mischief, the way she sang softly while mending clothes, and the way her courage seemed to grow stronger in the face of hardship. She never asked James to forget Mary, never pretended the pain wasn't there. Instead, she carried it with him, making it a shared weight rather than a solitary burden. As the seasons shifted from spring into the warmth of summer, James found himself drawn to Sarah in ways that both frightened and comforted him. He struggled with guilt, wondering if loving her would betray the memory of his wife. But each time he saw Sarah kneel by Mary's grave, speaking softly to her sister as though she were still listening, James realized that Sarah, too, carried her own grief. In their shared sorrow, a bond grew stronger than either expected. One evening, as the crimson sun sank below the horizon, James stood with Sarah on the porch. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers, and the world seemed to hold its breath. James finally spoke the words that had been buried deep inside him. "I don't know if I can ever love again the way I loved Mary, but I know my heart has found something new with you, Sarah. It feels wrong and right all at once." Sarah's eyes glistened, and she whispered back, "Mary wanted you to live, James. Not just survive. She wouldn't want you to be alone forever." Their hands found each other in the fading light, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as a fragile hope for what could be. The days turned into weeks, and the unspoken closeness between James and Sarah deepened. The ranch, once filled with shadows of grief, began to bloom with renewed life. Sarah's presence became a steady flame, warming the cold corners of James's heart. She brought laughter back into the home, teaching the young colts to trust her hand, filling the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread, and coaxing James into sharing stories from his youth that he hadn't spoken of in years. Slowly, the ranch returned to something resembling a home, not because Mary was forgotten, but because her memory was honored in every step they took forward. But whispers began to spread among the neighbors. Folks in town talked when they saw Sarah beside James at church, when they noticed her riding with him into the market, when they saw them laugh together on the porch. Some whispered it was improper, that grief was being buried too quickly. Others said it was fate, that perhaps Mary had guided her sister to James so he wouldn't be lost forever. James, once a man who cared little for town gossip, found himself wrestling with the weight of judgment. He worried people would think he had betrayed his wife's memory, and worse, he worried Sarah would be shamed for simply helping him. One stormy evening, thunder rolling over the plains, James confessed his fears to Sarah. "People think I've forgotten Mary. They don't understand that every day I still ache for her." Sarah, standing by the window with lightning illuminating her face, answered softly, "Love doesn't vanish when someone dies. Your love for Mary is carved into you, James. But love is not a grave, it can grow again." Her words struck him deeply, calming the storm inside his chest even as rain lashed against the roof. That night, as the storm cleared and stars returned, James made his decision. He would not live in the shadow of gossip or guilt anymore. He would honor Mary by living the life she would have wanted for him, a life filled with love, not loneliness. When James asked Sarah to be his bride, he did so not with grandeur, but with sincerity. He led her to the hill where Mary rested, beneath the oak tree that stood watch over her grave. With his hat pressed to his chest, he spoke aloud, as if Mary were listening, "I promised you, Mary, that I'd never forget you. I never will. But Sarah has been my strength when I had none. She's given me a reason to live again. If you can hear me, I hope you know this is not goodbye to you, it's me learning how to keep living." Then he turned to Sarah, tears in his eyes, and asked, "Will you be my wife?" With trembling hands, Sarah nodded, whispering, "Yes." Their wedding was small, held under the open sky with only a handful of close neighbors present. There were no grand decorations, no choir of bells, only the sound of the wind and the rustle of grass across the plains. But in its simplicity, it was powerful. James stood tall, his weathered face softened by love, while Sarah glowed with quiet strength. As they exchanged vows, James felt the weight of sorrow shift into something new, not erased, but transformed into a foundation for the future. Life on the ranch after their marriage was not without struggles. There were long days of hard labor, nights when grief returned like an unwelcome guest, and times when Sarah herself shed tears for her sister. But they faced it together, building a life rooted in resilience, forgiveness, and love. James never stopped visiting Mary's grave, but now, he often went with Sarah by his side, both of them speaking softly to the woman who had brought them together even in death. Their love story was not about forgetting but about healing. It was about how two broken hearts found a way to mend together, not in place of the past, but because of it. And in that healing, they discovered a love that was deeper than either had thought possible. The cowboy who once lost everything to fever had found hope again, not because time erased his pain, but because love grew in the soil of sorrow, blooming into something strong enough to endure. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of love, healing, and second chances, then make sure to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll join us for many more stories of courage, resilience, and the human spirit. Don't miss the next journey, we promise it will move you just as deeply.